Did you ever look at your Steam Deck and wish the screen just popped more? The general consensus among fans seems to suggest you're not alone. For many, there seems to be only one simple solution.
OLED. OLED.
OLED.
OLED.
OLED. OLED.
OLED.
OLED.
OLED.
OLED.
OLED.
Well, yeah. While that's not as easy to pull off as you might think, one day something popped up on Twitter and turned out as the first real alternative. I put it through its paces and spoke to not only one of the heads behind it, but also a friend of mine to answer one simple question. Is DeckHD a worthwhile upgrade for your Steam Deck?
Initially, to be fair, I thought it might not be possible.
That's Eric Saliev, creative lead at FX Tech, and one of the heads behind DeckHD.
It sounded... there's just way too many unknowns in the beginning.
With many different handhelds in my collection, 2 of them with an OLED panel, 2 different 4K OLED screens in my apartment, and a pressing case of technical fear of missing out, I really get it. Better colors and higher resolutions often provide a superior experience. So why not simply upgrade the display of the Steam Deck, right? The good news is, you can now.
We have a lot of projects involved at FX Technology. It's DeckHD is one of them.
DeckHD promises better sRGB coverage and a native resolution of 1920 by 1200, essentially 1.5 times the pixels of the Deck's 800p display. It also comes with an anti-glare coating.
It seemed like the perfect idea, even if it wasn't offered as an upgrade. Let's say people just broke their Steam Deck's displays.
And it makes sense as another potential upgrade over the base modeled screen. But first, let's get back to the beginning.
The product started really with Liang Shen. He's one of our directors. He has a Steam Deck and he really likes handhelds. And this idea came to make a better display, one that competes with other popular handhelds at the moment and is an upgrade from what you have original device.
By these other popular handhelds, he refers to competitors like the Aya Neo 2S and the ROG Ally, which both come with a higher resolution up to 1200p. While many of the parts are easy to swap out, just like the Hall Effect joysticks by GillyKit, which I will showcase in another video in this series, which you wouldn't want to miss, so be sure to subscribe and activate the bell. Replacing the screen is another story. While it took me around 3 hours, we need to keep in mind that I've replaced more parts of my deck. Then again, the most cumbersome process was to detach the old panel in the first place and get rid of its residue. But at the same time, that's something you would also have to do for a full shell swap. My friend Bill from Nerdnest did just that on stream a while ago. I will link his video in the description below, so make sure to check it out later.
Well, in the beginning, even the entire display wouldn't light up. It was, and then we finally got half of it working.
For a bit of context, while the deck leverages a display serial interface, short DSI, to connect the panel to its mainboard, there are many other things to factor in. One of them is the firmware and BIOS.
And that was Balazs's work to support more pixels.
Remember from the beginning? Balazs is one of FX Tech's hardware developers and the one I got in touch with on Twitter.
That was one of the bigger challenges, and that is where I personally had a lot of doubts. This seemed quite challenging in the beginning, making people flash their BIOS after they install it and support for that.
I mean, yeah, quite understandable. The need for a dedicated BIOS flash was one of the major gripes I had with DeckHD. Thankfully, the process isn't more complicated than, say, installing cryo utilities. You need to boot into desktop mode, download and then run a script file. After a minute or 2, your Steam Deck should reboot automatically. When SteamOS shows up, you will notice the high resolution straight away. But what happens if that firmware gets overwritten through official updates? Wouldn't it be great if this isn't something the user would have to worry about?
We are in touch with Valve on that, because it's not something we can support through Valve's backend. Ideally, Valve would have our settings baked into their BIOS, which then they push to devices. But at this moment, it's probably too early to promise that.
Thankfully, there seems to be a good amount of commitment on FX Tech's end, as well as much needed transparency.
Let's say you go out of business, what happens? And Valve releases a new BIOS. What will happen? Can I use the screen still? And that's why we're going to open source it. It's not available just yet, but in a few months it will be available. But of course, this doesn't change our commitment to update it ourselves. It's just available to other people to make sure that there's nothing we've changed, nothing significant besides for the extra pixels, but it gives extra peace of mind to people.
After a few weeks with the DeckHD upgrade, I'm surprised how much of a difference it makes. Also, since this was the biggest concern for most folks out there, Valve's Handheld actually managed to handle the increased resolution fairly well. Most indie games and older releases will run great. Sure, DeckHD comes at a cost, which we touch base on in a moment, and you shouldn't expect all games to run the same, given you actually apply the higher res. Because that's the thing. To have games taking advantage of 1920 by 1200, you need to change the target resolution in the Steam library to native. Yes, for every game, one by one. Because there's no global toggle available right now. I reached out to Valve about this in the past, but without luck.
In any case, it would be nice to see, if Valve included something like that in the future. But I guess we need to get more traction before they take that seriously.
If you still resort to 800p, thankfully SteamOS gives you plenty of options to deal with that. Your games still look absolutely fine, but take advantage of the massive boost in color accuracy and contrast. In the past, you had to leverage stuff like Vibrant Deck for Decky Loader, and SteamOS 3.5 will ship with its own color adjustment tools. Yet, you're just slapping more saturation on the stock screen, which simply can't compete with an increase of sRGB coverage. But let's zoom out for a moment and talk about the experience. While the replacement itself was anything but fun to pull off, I'm really happy with the result. Not only do all my backlog titles look more vivid and sharper than before, also did this cheapo finally get a proper anti-glare coating. The quality is actually comparable to the etching Valve applies to their screen.
Even if it wasn't offered as an upgrade, let's say people just broke their Steam Deck's displays, it still makes a notable improvement over what is currently offered.
Both cost around $100, so yeah, keep that in mind when you break your stock display. While everything works as intended, such as lowering the refresh rate down to 40 Hz, there are indeed some obvious trade-offs. Games which already barely managed to run at stable 30 or 60 FPS before will of course give you a bad time at 1200p. Thankfully, the Deck's APU has enough headroom for more games to run at higher resolution than you might expect. As you can see, it's a game of compromises. For more demanding titles, it's often enough to settle for the next lower frame rate target, such as 40 instead of 60 or 30 instead of 40 FPS. Sometimes it's even enough to enable in-game dynamic resolution scaling if available. But still, the Steam Deck truly lives up its hype as backlog killer even at 1200p. Most indies and modern classics I've tested ran perfectly fine, but looked so much better than before.
What we're doing at the moment is we're making this dedicated comparison page where we'll take actual photos with a camera of the DeckHD and the original display for each game, each popular game, and put those on the website side by side. And people will also be able to request a certain game that they want to see.
As of right now, there are already a handful of games available to compare on the DeckHD site, but unfortunately without performance metrics. Though, if you keep your expectations in check, you will be fine. But Timo, what about
OLED, OLED,
OLED, OLED, OLED, OLED,
OLED,
OLED, OLED, OLED, OLED.
There is a reason nobody came around with an OLED upgrade yet. However, let's ask someone who knows the stuff better.
The main reason we don't have an OLED Steam Deck display, or at least a replacement OLED Steam Deck display, comes down to the simple fact that all of these are using hand-me-down displays that were already manufactured for phones and tablets that had already existed. And typically all of these mobile displays will be using the MIPI DSi standard. So we're going from MIPI DSi to EDP. The problem here is that to create a display is a significant cost, because talking to any display manufacturer are going to want a minimum order quantity that is very high, which is why Asus, which is a laptop manufacturer and also can make displays themselves, is the only real PC gaming handheld that has an EDP display that is landscape and VRR, and it's VRR because it supports EDP. Basically, it comes down to a cost reason. The reason that we don't have an OLED display for the Steam Deck is that there are no OLED panels that already exist that are MIPI DSi that fit the panel for the Steam Deck, and that's all it really comes down to. So they probably had like 10 to 15 different displays of what's already out there. And then they chose the display that was on the Steam Deck as it is, probably because of the refresh rate that it can target across all of those frequencies that they want, 40 to 60 and anything in between. And more than likely, that is one of the bigger reasons why they went with the display that's on the Steam Deck currently, but that is also the reason why we don't have an OLED replacement screen for the Steam Deck.
There you have it. I wish reality were different, but perhaps that's something Valve is already working on for a Steam Deck successor. In the meantime, you could either settle for a handheld with an OLED screen, such as the Switch OLED or the Ayaneo Air 1S, or opt for the next best thing like a better screen with DeckHD. For my part, I'm really happy with the upgrade, but don't mind tinkering around with performance settings at all. Thanks to DeckHD for providing the review sample and to Eric and Carrie for taking their time answering my questions. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. There's so much more to come. And for anyone wondering,
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
cheers!